The alien queen whispered softly, "Why does my daughter see you as father, human?" Jason had expected the palace of Aeloria to be a fortress of marble and silence. As a human envoy, he thought his life here would be little more than endless treaties, long councils filled with stiff protocol, and the heavy weight of alien eyes measuring every move he made. His boots clicked against the glimmering stone floors as he was escorted through the towering halls by armored guards whose skin shone in shades of blue and violet. Their eyes glowed faintly in the light of hovering crystal lamps, watching him with a guarded suspicion that he had already grown accustomed to. He had been on alien worlds before. He had sat across tables where peace was more fragile than the paper the treaties were written on. But here in Aeloria he felt a different kind of weight. The palace seemed alive, its walls carved with flowing patterns that glowed faintly, like veins of light pulsing with the energy of the world itself. The air carried a faint sweetness, almost floral, unlike anything on Earth. And yet, despite all its grandeur, Jason felt the familiar ache of loneliness. For days, his work was predictable. He listened, he nodded, he signed his name on scrolls that never seemed to end. His quarters were spacious but cold, the silence pressing on him when night fell. Sometimes he would step into the palace gardens just to breathe freely, to look up at the twin moons of Aeloria that drifted side by side across the night sky. It was in one of those gardens, surrounded by silver-leaf trees and flowers that glowed faintly in the dark, that everything changed. Jason had been walking quietly, his cloak brushing against the trimmed grass, when a small figure appeared. She darted from behind a pillar, blue-skinned, small, with wide silver eyes that shimmered like molten stars. A thin golden circlet rested crookedly on her dark hair, too large for her tiny head. She could not have been older than 6 human years, though by Aeolorian measure she was slightly younger. The child ran straight toward him, her little feet pattering across the stone path. Jason stopped, blinking in surprise, unsure whether to step back or kneel. But before he could do anything, she tugged at the edge of his cloak with her small hands. Her voice was clear, high, and full of certainty as she spoke one word that shattered the stillness of the garden. "Father!" The sound echoed like thunder in silence. From behind the trees, courtiers gasped. Guards stiffened, their glowing eyes widening. Several nobles, draped in their jeweled robes, whispered fiercely to one another. Jason felt the air itself tighten around him, as though the garden had suddenly become a courtroom. He looked down at the little girl, her silver eyes shining with innocent joy as she clung to his cloak. His throat went dry. "I think you mistake me," Jason said softly, lowering himself to meet her gaze. But her smile never wavered. She simply tilted her head, as though he had said something silly. "Father," she repeated, firmer this time. Jason's heart stumbled in his chest. He had no words. He had met children before, but never one who looked at him with such absolute trust, as though the simple act of his presence was enough to anchor her world. And yet, he could feel the weight of the court stairs digging into his back. The whispers grew louder, spreading like fire through the garden. The word had been spoken, and it could not be taken back. Before Jason could ask the child's name, guards moved forward. Their spears gleamed, though they did not point them at him yet. The captain's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "Envoy Jason, the Queen summons you at once." Jason straightened, the child still clutching his cloak. He wanted to explain, to tell them he had no idea why she had said such a thing, but the looks in their eyes warned him. This was not a matter of confusion. This was a matter that cut to the very heart of the throne. The little girl beamed up at him, as though proud of her words. Jason gently pried her hands free, his stomach tightening. Whoever she was, she had just placed him at the center of something far larger than he understood. The guards surrounded him. The courtiers whispered more urgently. Jason was led out of the glowing garden, the image of the child's smile etched into his mind. That night, under the watchful gaze of 1,000 torches, Jason entered the throne hall of Aeloria. At the far end, seated upon a seat carved from living crystal, was a figure who made the entire court fall silent. Her presence filled the hall as surely as the moons filled the sky. Queen Seraphina. And it was she who whispered, her voice soft as silk but sharp enough to pierce bone. "Why does my daughter see you as father, human?" The throne room of Aeloria was vast, its crystal walls alive with faint pulses of light that shifted with the rhythm of the queen's presence. Tall columns rose like frozen streams of water, bending toward the ceiling where veins of glowing stones spread like constellations. Jason walked between them, flanked by guards whose armor glimmered with faint blue fire. His steps echoed sharply, yet the silence of the gathered nobles drowned even that sound. Queen Seraphina sat upon her throne, her posture tall, her expression unreadable. She was unlike anyone Jason had ever seen. Her skin shimmered with a deep sapphire glow, as if the light of the cosmos itself lingered in her veins. Her black hair, long and heavy, spilled over her shoulders in waves, crowned by a circlet of woven silver. Her eyes, bright as sapphires lit by fire, watched him with a gaze so piercing he almost forgot to breathe. But what struck Jason most was not her beauty. It was the grief in her face. Hidden beneath the rigid mask of authority was an echo of sorrow, carved deep by time and loss. The little girl was there, standing just a few steps away from the throne. Princess Aeloria. Her silver eyes were wide, still full of the innocent certainty that had shaken the gardens. She looked at Jason as though expecting him to come stand by her side. But when Seraphina's voice filled the hall, that expectation froze in the air. "Why does my daughter see you as father, human?" The words were soft, but they struck like iron. Jason bowed deeply, lowering himself in respect. His heart pounded, but his voice, when it came, was steady. "Your Majesty, I cannot say why she believes this. I have not sought such a title." The queen's eyes narrowed. "Not sought it?" Aeloria does not mistake words. Envoy. My daughter does not call strangers father. Her voice grew colder, cutting through the hall like a blade of ice. Do you think this is a jest? Some clever human trick to twist her heart and gain a place within this palace? Whispers rose from the courtiers, harsh, eager, poisonous. Jason felt the weight of suspicion pressing in from every side. He lifted his eyes to meet the queen's. "No trick, no scheme. I only showed her kindness." She was alone in the gardens when storms rattled the skies. She was frightened, and I walked with her. She asked me to read her stories, and I did. When she cried, I listened. That is all. For a moment, silence returned to the hall. Jason saw the queen's expression shift, so faintly most would have missed it. The grief behind her eyes flickered, a memory stirring. Her gaze fell briefly upon her daughter, who stood clutching the hem of her gown. Aeoria's small voice broke the silence, trembling but determined. "He did not trick me, mother. He makes me feel safe." Seraphina inhaled slowly. The court had no answer for a child's truth, but their whispers returned in hushed tones. The queen raised her hand, and silence cut through the hall once more. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, though no less sharp. "Kindness can be dangerous in these halls, human. You do not yet understand what your presence stirs." Her gaze locked onto his, steady and unrelenting. "Do not mistake her affection as a shield. In Aeloria, bonds such as these can be twisted, broken, and used as weapons. For her sake, and for your own, you must tread carefully." Jason bowed his head again, though he felt her warning burn in his chest. "I understand, Majesty. I never meant to disrupt your court." But even as he spoke, he could not shake the image of the little girl's eyes, bright with trust. And when he lifted his gaze once more, he caught something unexpected in the queen's expression. Her grief, though still veiled, had shifted. There was no longer only suspicion. There was a flicker of something else, something she quickly buried beneath her regal mask. Jason's breath caught. Against all reason, against the cold edge of her words, he felt a pull. Ah yes, but something deeper, something that unsettled him. The queen leaned back in her throne, her long hair spilling like a dark river down her shoulders. "You will continue your duties as envoy. But hear me clearly, Jason of Earth. Do not let my daughter's innocent heart lead you into shadows that will swallow you whole. Her words were final, her tone like stone. Yet Jason knew in that instant that the matter was far from closed. As the guards moved to escort him from the hall, Jason cast one last glance at the queen. She had turned her head slightly, her eyes no longer fixed on him, but on her daughter. Aeloria smiled faintly, her small hand still clutching the fabric of her mother's gown. And in that tender glance between queen and child, Jason glimpsed the truth behind Seraphina's walls. She was not only a monarch. She was a mother, one who had carried grief for far too long. And now, somehow, he had been drawn into that fragile bond. The days that followed were quieter on the surface, yet Jason could feel the shift in the air around him. Everywhere he went within the palace, eyes followed. At first, he told himself it was nothing unusual. He was, after all, an envoy from another world, a human walking among the nobility of Aeloria. But soon the glances lingered too long, and the whispers grew too sharp to ignore. Even the servants, who moved like shadows through the gilded halls, lowered their voices when he passed. Their words carried fragments: the human, the princess, the throne. Jason pretended not to hear, but the tension pressed against him like invisible chains. Yet amidst the unease, there was light. Princess Aeloria sought him out whenever she could, slipping past attendants and running to find him in the gardens or the library. She brought him little treasures: smooth stones from the palace fountains, folded flowers with glowing petals, even a feather from the great skybirds that nested in the towers. Each time, she called him father with such certainty that Jason no longer tried to correct her. He only smiled, though deep inside he feared what her innocent affection might cost them both. It was not only the child who drew his attention. Queen Seraphina, though distant and formal, had begun to watch him differently. Jason noticed her gaze linger when he read stories aloud to Aeloria in the palace gardens. He noticed the way her expression softened, almost imperceptibly, when her daughter laughed at his silly voices or clutched his hand while walking along the silver paths. Seraphina never interrupted, but Jason could feel her presence. Always regal, always restrained. Standing just beyond the edge of the scene. He told himself it was only natural. She was a mother, watching her daughter find joy after years of quiet grief. But when her sapphire eyes met his, Jason felt the strange pull again. The mixture of awe and something deeper that he could not yet name. The court, however, saw none of this with gentle eyes. Rumors began to spread like vines curling through the palace. Some whispered that Jason had bewitched the child with human sorcery. Others claimed he sought to use her innocent affection as a ladder to power, climbing step by step toward the throne itself. The most venomous whispers suggested that perhaps Seraphina herself was beginning to fall under his influence. Jason felt the hostility growing sharper. One evening, he returned to his chambers to find his belongings disturbed. The scrolls on his desk had been rifled through, his cloak half unfolded on the floor. No servant admitted to entering, but he knew someone had searched. Another time, while walking through the upper halls, a loose stone nearly gave way beneath his boot, sending shards tumbling into the abyss below. He caught himself just in time, heart hammering, and wondered if it was truly an accident. The unease deepened when he overheard two nobles in a shadowed corridor. They did not see him in the dim glow of the crystal lamps, but he heard their words clearly. "The child calls him father," one hissed. "Then the queen must decide. Either she severs this bond or she risks the throne itself," the other replied. Jason lingered only long enough to hear them whisper about a council meeting. Then he slipped away, his pulse quickening. He had come here as a diplomat, a man of peace. But now he felt as though he had been cast into a game he had never agreed to play, a game where pieces bled and shadows whispered of daggers. Still, he did not withdraw. Aeoria's joy kept him tethered, and Seraphina's silent glances gave him strength he could not explain. He continued his duties, walking the long halls with measured steps, signing scrolls, bowing to nobles. But in the back of his mind, he felt the threads tightening around him. It was during a walk in the moonlit gardens that the truth revealed itself more clearly. Jason had gone there to breathe, to let the night air clear the weight from his chest. The twin moons hung high, silver and pale blue, casting long shadows across the trimmed paths. Flowers glowed faintly, swaying in the breeze. For a moment he thought himself alone. But then he heard the rustle of fabric. A voice, low and urgent, drifted from behind a wall of flowering vines. Jason paused, his hand brushing the stone. He listened. It must be done. The queen grows weak. The human makes her falter. If the child continues to cling to him, our line is threatened. We cannot allow it. Another voice answered, colder still. Then it is settled. Strike at the root. Strike at them both. In the gardens, beneath the moons. None will suspect until it is too late. Jason's breath caught. His hands curled into fists as he pulled back from the vines. He knew then that the danger was no longer whispers in the dark. It was sharpened steel ready to fall. And the ones they planned to strike were not only him, but Seraphina and her daughter. The gardens of Aeloria were never meant for blood. They were built for peace, for starlight reflections and gentle walks beneath glowing blossoms. Yet on that night, under the twin moons, Jason felt the stillness of the air break like glass beneath a hammer. He had gone to the gardens because Seraphina had summoned him there. It was unusual for the queen to leave her throne for private meetings, but she had sent word that she wished to speak where ears could not twist her words. Jason waited near the fountain where crystal water spilled from the carved wings of a great bird. The sound of falling water masked the pounding of his heart. Then, from the archway of vines, Seraphina appeared. She moved with the grace of flowing silk, her black hair shimmering beneath moonlight, her royal robes edged with threads that glowed faintly. And beside her, clutching her hand, was little Aeloria, her silver eyes wide with delight at the night air. "Envoy," Seraphina said softly, her voice carrying both warmth and warning. "You should not linger alone in these gardens. They are not as safe as they seem." Jason gave a tight smile. "I was told as much. Yet I could not ignore your summons." Seraphina's lips curved faintly, though her eyes held a shadow of caution. She was about to speak again when the air shifted. A faint scrape of metal against stone reached Jason's ears. His instincts, honed by years of walking foreign halls where trust was a fragile thing, screamed a warning. "Behind you!" Jason shouted. The attack came swift and silent. Figures cloaked in black leapt from the shadows, their blades gleaming under the twin moons. Jason reacted without thought. He lunged, shoving Seraphina and Aeloria back just as the first dagger slashed through the air where they had stood. The assassin's blade tore through Jason's cloak, grazing his arm. Guards were stationed at the far end of the gardens, but the assassins had struck with precision. They meant to finish their work before help could arrive. Jason seized a fallen branch from the path, wielding it like a staff as the second attacker lunged. The wood cracked against steel, sparks flying as he parried the strike. Pain surged through his arm, but he held firm, planting himself between the queen, the child, and the advancing blades. "Stay behind me," he barked, though his voice shook with the force of the clash. The first assassin swept low, his curved dagger aimed at Jason's legs. Jason twisted, blocking with the branch, then drove his shoulder into the man's chest. The assassin stumbled, but another came from the side, slashing across Jason's shirt. Cloth tore. Heat flared across his ribs as the blade kissed skin. Blood welled, dark against pale fabric. Jason gritted his teeth. He struck back with raw force, swinging the branch hard enough to crack against the attacker's jaw. The man dropped, groaning. Seraphina's eyes widened as she watched. For years she had seen warriors fight in her defense, men clad in armor and wielding crafted blades. But here stood a human envoy, armed with nothing but a branch, standing firm between her daughter and death. His movements were clumsy compared to her seasoned guards, yet his courage burned brighter than steel. Aeloria cried out, clutching her mother's gown, tears streaking her blue cheeks. "Father!" The word tore through the night, stronger than any blade. Jason's chest tightened, But he did not falter. He turned just in time to catch another strike across his shoulder. The pain seared deep, blood spilling freely, but still he refused to step aside. With a final desperate push, he swung the branch and sent the last attacker staggering into the fountain. Water splashed high as the man crashed against stone. For a moment silence fell. The assassins writhed, defeated but not dead, their dark hoods torn back to reveal the sharp features of Aeolorian nobles' hired blades. Jason staggered, his shirt drenched with blood. His knees buckled, but before he could fall, Seraphina was at his side. She knelt, her long robes pooling on the stone, her hands catching him as though he were something precious. "Jason!" Her voice cracked, the first time he had heard her speak his name not with suspicion or command, but with fear. She pressed her hands against his wound, her sapphire eyes shining with something raw and unguarded. "Stay with me. Do not you dare fall." He looked at her through the haze of pain. For a moment, the queen was no longer a distant figure draped in power. She was a woman, a mother, terrified of losing the one man who had stepped willingly into the fire for her and her child. Guards burst into the garden at last, weapons drawn, their shouts echoing. They seized the assassins, dragging them away as the night filled with chaos. But Jason heard none of it. His world had narrowed to the warmth of Seraphina's hands and the soft, trembling weight of Aeloria as she pressed against his uninjured side, sobbing into his cloak. Jason's breath was ragged, his voice weak but steady. "You are safe, both of you." Seraphina looked down at him, her lips parting as though she would speak. But no words came, only a soft whisper of his name, as if she feared to lose it with him. Her hand lingered on his cheek, trembling. And in that moment, beneath the twin moons of Aeloria, the walls she had built for years began to crack. The palace never slept after the attack. The corridors echoed with hurried footsteps, the clang of armor, and the murmured voices of nobles who pretended to mourn while their eyes glittered with suspicion. Guards doubled at every door, and whispers filled the council chambers like smoke. Yet through the storm of voices and the rustle of silk robes, the story spread faster than any decree. The human envoy had thrown himself before blades meant for the queen and her child. Jason spent the next days confined to his chambers, his wounds dressed by alien healers whose hands glowed faintly with energy. The cuts burned, but the healer's art closed them quickly, leaving thin scars that throbbed in the night. He tried to rest, but the silence was heavy. He knew the daggers in the gardens had not been the end of it. The first sign came at a banquet held days later. Jason was invited as an envoy, seated at a long crystal table beneath a ceiling carved with constellations. Noble lords and jeweled ladies filled the hall with laughter, though their eyes rarely left him. He lifted a goblet of wine to his lips, but as the liquid touched his tongue, a bitter sting laced the sweetness. Jason froze. He set the goblet down, eyes narrowing. Moments later, one of the guards tested the cup. The liquid turned black against silver. Poison. Gasps rippled through the hall, but Jason saw more than shock. He saw satisfaction flicker across a few faces before it vanished behind masks of horror. Later that night, a tapestry fell from the palace walls as he walked beneath it. The heavy fabric nearly crushed him before he leapt aside, landing hard against the marble floor. The guards called it an accident, but Jason no longer believed in accidents within these halls. Each attempt was more desperate than the last. He began to feel the danger pressing in from every corner. Yet even as the threats grew sharper, so did the bond between him and the queen. Seraphina visited him often now. Sometimes she brought Aeloria, who would curl against Jason's side while he read softly from ancient scrolls. Sometimes she came alone, her steps soft, her face no longer cloaked entirely in steel. At first, their conversations were about duty, the needs of the council, the fragile balance of power. But slowly, their words shifted. One night, she lingered by the window of his chamber, gazing at the twin moons rising over the palace. Her black hair shimmered like a river of ink in the pale light. "When my husband fell," she said quietly, "I swore I would never allow my heart to weaken again. My daughter was all I had left." The court saw that weakness and turned it into chains. I thought I had sealed my heart in iron. But then, she stopped, her voice breaking for the first time. Jason rose, ignoring the pull of his healing wounds. He stood beside her, the moons casting silver across his scarred face. Then your daughter looked at me and saw something that even I did not see in myself, he said gently. Her sapphire eyes turned to him, wide and searching. Do you know what you have done to her, human? She has hope again. She smiles. She sleeps without tears. That should bring me only joy, and yet I fear it. Because hope can be broken, Jason said. Her lips trembled faintly. Yes. Jason reached out, hesitated, then let his fingers brush against hers. His hand was rough, scarred from battle and struggle. Hers was soft, though it trembled as though unused to touch. The moment their hands met, Seraphina inhaled sharply, but she did not pull away. You are not weak for loving her, Jason whispered. You are strong. Stronger than anyone who hides behind daggers and whispers. For a long moment, silence hung between them. Then Seraphina's hand turned in his, her fingers curling around his with a strength that surprised him. You speak as though you know my heart, she said, her voice low but no longer cold. Jason met her gaze steadily. Because I feel it too. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Under the twin moons, her walls crumbled further. Her free hand rose, almost against her will, brushing against the edge of his jaw where faint stubble shadowed his skin. Her touch was tentative, but when Jason did not pull away, she lingered. For the first time since he had arrived in Aeloria, Seraphina smiled. Not the practiced curve of a monarch, but the unguarded smile of a woman whose heart had begun to thaw. Their hands remained clasped as the silence stretched, filled only by the sound of the wind rustling through the banners beyond the balcony. Aeloria stirred faintly in her sleep in the adjoining chamber, but the two adults stood frozen, bound by something greater than duty or fear. And in that stillness, Seraphina whispered the words that would forever change both their lives. I no longer see you as only an envoy. I see you as the man who gave my daughter hope. And her voice faltered, her sapphire eyes shimmering. I see you as the man who has awakened my heart. Jason's breath caught. He had walked through halls of politics, fought shadows in gardens, and faced death with nothing but a branch in hand. But nothing struck him as deeply as the sound of those words. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss against her fingers. Then we are not alone, he said softly. And for the first time in years, the Queen of Aeloria allowed herself to rest her head against another's shoulder, the twin moons watching silently as a new bond was forged in the midst of danger. The council chamber of Aeloria glittered with gold and menace. Tall crystal windows cast beams of morning light across the curved floor, illuminating nobles in flowing robes and warriors draped in ceremonial armor. The air was heavy, thick with perfume, fear, and the sharp sting of accusation. At the center of the chamber stood Jason. His wounds had healed into faint scars, but his presence was steadier than ever. His shoulders squared, his gaze calm. Around him, whispers hissed like snakes. The human court's danger. He seeks the queen's favor and her throne. He must be exiled before ruin falls upon us. At the far end, Queen Seraphina sat upon the throne of Aeloria, tall, regal, unyielding. Yet those close enough to see her eyes would not have described them as cold. They were storm-bright, their depths filled with something her court had not seen in years. Fire. The High Chancellor, a thin man with jeweled chains across his chest, raised his voice. Your Majesty, this cannot continue. The human disrupts our ways. He poisons the heart of your daughter with false claims of fatherhood. He turns your gaze from duty. If you do not cast him out, whispers will become rebellion. Murmurs of agreement echoed like drumbeats. The nobles leaned forward, eyes glittering with triumph. They believed they had cornered her. Jason bowed his head slightly. He had expected this. He knew he could speak in his own defense. But in this chamber, words would be twisted, truth smothered beneath politics. So he remained silent, waiting, trusting that the queen's voice would matter more than his own. And then the chamber stilled. Seraphina rose. Every noble fell silent at once, for none dared speak when the queen stood. Her robe of black and silver flowed around her like storm clouds, her crown glinting beneath the morning light. She took one step down from her throne, her voice ringing clear across the hall. "My lords, my counselors, my people," she began. "You speak of danger. You speak of disruption. You speak of exile. But you have not spoken of truth." The chancellor stiffened. "Truth, your majesty?" Her sapphire gaze swept the chamber. "The truth is this: my daughter, who had been silent with grief for years, now laughs again. She sleeps without tears. She smiles, not for crowns or jewels, but because one man chose to see her heart instead of her title." The nobles shifted uncomfortably, but none dared interrupt. Seraphina's voice deepened, blazing with a force that made even the guards stiffen. "You whisper that he seeks my throne. But what has he sought, if not to shield me from blades, to stand against poison, to protect my child with his life? While others here scheme and conspire, this human has bled for me." Her words struck like thunder. Several nobles flinched. The queen's hand lifted, pointing toward Jason. "My daughter calls him father, and I—" Her voice softened, though the power in it never wavered. "I call him mine." The chamber gasped. Robes rustled, jeweled heads turned sharply. Whispers exploded like firecrackers in the silence that followed. But Seraphina's raised hand stilled them all. "This is not manipulation. This is not treachery. This is love. And if my throne trembles at the weight of love, then perhaps the throne was never strong to begin with." Her final words fell like a blade. No one dared oppose her. Not the chancellor, not the whispering nobles, not even the most ambitious lords. The queen's will was law, and her will had been declared before all. Jason's chest tightened. He had never expected this, never dared dream that she would claim him so openly, so fiercely. And yet here he stood, at the center of a storm that had suddenly become still. Later, under Aeloria's twin moons, the stillness gave way to celebration. The palace glowed with lanterns and banners of silver and blue. Nobles and commoners alike filled the courtyards as music swept through the night. In the great hall, before an altar carved of crystal, Jason stood at Seraphina's side. She wore a gown woven with starlight, her crown resting lightly upon her head, her sapphire eyes never leaving his. Aeloria stood between them, her small hands clasping both of theirs. Her silver eyes shone with a joy so pure it silenced even the most bitter tongues. The ceremony was short but eternal. Vows were spoken, hands bound with ribbons of light, lips touched in a promise that bridged two worlds. And when it was done, Aeoria's voice rang through the hall, clear as a bell. "Father!" The crowd gasped once more, but this time there were no whispers, no daggers behind eyes. Only the sound of a child's laughter echoing through the palace. Jason, once a weary envoy, had become something far greater. A father, a lover, and now king consort of Aeloria. The fate of the realm had changed forever, not through conquest, nor through politics, but through the simple, unyielding power of love. And under the light of the twin moons, Jason and Seraphina's story began anew.